Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar that is being put on by the Extension Disaster Education Network. The topic today is the flood insurance rate map and flood risk and regulations. I'm Ken Hellevank, agricultural engineer at North Dakota State University, and serve as co-leader of the Eden flood team. And we're happy to have you joining us today for this topic. And I want to start out by introducing our speaker for today, and then I'm going to also interject that in addition to the material that Pat will be going through at the end of the presentation, we'll be jointly covering several resources that are available to you. So today's presenter is Pat Skinner, who is with the Louisiana State University Ag Center Cooperative Extension Service, as indicated on the slide. She works a lot with the Eden website, and in addition to that, has worked extensively with flood mapping, and in particular, the Louisiana Flood Maps portal. So I think I'll keep the introduction relatively short and turn it over to Pat to lead us through her presentation. Pat, go ahead.
Thanks, Ken, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be able to talk about this program. I've actually been working in the program or with the program on an educational kind of basis for about 22 years, so it's I've gone through several variations of it, and just recently become more and more impressed with the importance of this tool that we're going to look at, which is the flood insurance rate map. I want to call your attention first to the upper left-hand corner of your screen. There is a file, the NFIP webinar resources file, and I want to encourage you to go ahead and download that, and if you can, print it out, but it will give you a closer up look at the map that we're going to be talking about throughout the presentation. It also has live links to all of the links that I have in the presentation and some links that I mentioned but are not on these slides. So a lot of that will help you orient what I'm saying. You can go to those resources and find information about your state and your communities, which will make it more relevant to you if you want to follow along. It also has some basic definitions, 100-year flood, 500-year flood, special flood hazard area that you can refer back to. They go by different names sometimes. So if you can, go ahead and download that file and have it available either on another computer or print it out so you can get a really good look. I will say this presentation system has extremely high quality clarity, so you shouldn't have any trouble viewing the map and the various features that I'm pointing out, but if it would be helpful, you'll have your own little piece in hand that you can write on. So let me go ahead and see if I can run this system. The flood insurance rate map is the subject of the day, and we're really going to spend a lot of time just looking at this map and different parts of it, because this is the basic tool for understanding the flood insurance program, and is the basic tool that the flood insurance program uses for all the parts of it. As you would expect from the name, Flood Insurance Rate Map, it is the basis for rating flood insurance that's sold through the National Flood Insurance Program. I'll talk a little bit about how insurance is different for different zones on this map, and different for buildings, different buildings depending on when they were built and when they were mapped into the flood zone. The regulations apply pretty much across the board, but they're triggered at different times. And you get special insurance premium treatment if, for instance, you were there first or before the area was mapped. So we'll look into that and how this map is used. Trying to advance the old-fashioned way, sorry. It is also the basis for regulating development. And most people that work in the National Flood Insurance Program in some aspect either work on the insurance side or on the regulatory side. And those two don't often enough get together on how what one is doing is impacting the other. So, the fact that this is used for regulating development has gotten us in a bit of a pickle, because the standard that's used for rating flood insurance, while the law allows it to be a minimum standard for regulating, that has become kind of most of the standard for regulating development, and it's a little bit too low for a number of reasons for really protecting new development from future flood hazards. The recent legislation, if you've heard about Biggert Waters and Grim Waters and BW12 and the things that have been going on with respect mostly to flood insurance premiums, they all relate back to this map. And what happened in the course of the legislation is that everybody started looking at the map and how good is the map. So it kind of backfired a little bit. The other use of this system, or tied into this with the insurance and the development regulations, is that if you're trying to secure a loan for any an existing home, or for building a new home, or even for mortgaging some property to use it as collateral for something, if it's in the flood hazard area, this map would be used to determine that, and either through statutes or through just rules in different agencies, that can have an impact on whether you can borrow the money and what you're going to pay to borrow the money. So my goal today is really to try and increase your comfort level with the flood insurance rate map, and understand that it has an impact on a wide range of our audiences. I would like, together with you, to discover some opportunities to take some of the important messages about this program to our existing extension clientele, just through existing programs. How do you kind of fit that into what you're trying to say generally about housing, for instance? And then to answer some questions you might have about the reforms of the program. It's been in the news a lot, caused a lot of heartache, and then about where the program stands now. My ulterior motive is that I would like to learn something from you, always trying to do it a little bit better. This is a very, very complex subject, and I may spend too much time on one thing, and maybe you needed to know more about another. And so if any feedback that I can get from you about the emphasis of this, or how I've explained something, really would be very helpful, because I really think it's important for people to understand, and it's a very confusing subject. So any tips from you would be much appreciated. And I'd like you to get this comfort level enough to help yourself, or to help you help others, even casually, or to get into programming if you're not already programming with flood risk and flood insurance. I'd like it to be news you can use. I mentioned the resources file. I'll point it out again in the upper left corner. Would be very helpful to you, probably, if you can go ahead and get that in your hands. It does have a picture of the flood map, easy access to a number of the websites that I'm going to mention. And when you do that, you'll be finding your own data for your own communities. Also, I'd like to use the chat box to interact. Of course, if you have questions at any time, go ahead and type those into the chat box. This is being recorded, so what you say in the chat box could be as beneficial to future viewers as what I say. So if you would do that. Also on that resource file, you have some basic definitions, and you know, whether it's the 100-year flood or the base flood or the 1% annual chance flood, those are all the same flood, and if you forget those labels, they're all written down for you on that reference sheet. Okay, so Jeannie, we have a poll. Who's your audience? If you all listening would go on and you can choose all of those that apply. Local government, look at that. 3, 4, 5. And if you choose other, we have some others there. If you would type in who your audience is, your primary audience, into the chat box so we can see who that is. Capture that. I'm not seeing anything in the chat box right now. We got 3 people with another audience. Ah, people are typing. Excellent. Okay, so we have nobody doing youth work. We have nobody doing business management kind of education. Lots of individual family. Local government, that's good because they play a huge role in this. Okay, statewide, really? Statewide flooding. Community leaders, homeowners, Firewise main program area. Great. Well, welcome. Thank you for being here. Okay, Jeannie, I'm going to go to the next poll. Rural or urban? Okay, well, here we got some suburban. Mostly rural. Okay. Very good. Well, this program applies across the board. We'll talk about just a couple of little variations. Rural and urban. Okay, let's go to the next one, Jeannie. Here's directly to the point, do you speak NFIP? Have you been doing any of these things already? If you're doing statewide floodplain management, Ken, you probably do some of this. Okay, so we do have some experience. All right. I don't know if that's all the same person or a range of people, but hopefully the questions won't be too tough and you don't know more about this than I do. All right, I think we're ready to move on. I just want to, again, review. Thank you, Jeannie, for the polls. Today's program, it's going to be very basic. What the flood insurance rate map says. How do you read it? What's behind it? And what flood risks are depicted on it? Then what does it mean? Okay, what is the impact of that, what we're reading on that map? And then this third thing here should be a separate bullet, but what it means, and it's the NFIP messages and our extension programs that we will do together, and the status and the uncertain future of the NFIP, because what we're hearing now is, at least FEMA is saying, they are hearing that flood insurance is important, but it needs to be affordable. And they're also going around asking people not to cancel their policies because of that legislation in 2012 really started killing them. So we'll cover that. Now, these are some of the resources where you'll see some of the resources you can use. The program is active in all the states and territories. And through that URL, which is in that webinar resources file, you can actually get who the contact is, who is your state NFIP coordinator, and their contact information. And I just went through that list, and just as a matter of personal interest, to see where different states house the Office of Floodplain Regulations or the National Flood Insurance Program office in their state. The majority of them are in environmental or conservation type offices. Next would be Homeland Security and Emergency Management type offices. A few in the community development and planning and economic development offices, 2 in agriculture and 1 in the transportation and development. And that one is yours truly, Louisiana, where the floodplain regulations is in the Department of Transportation and Development. Also, any community that participates in the program has to have a floodplain administrator. Maybe one of 10 different hats that person wears, but there is somebody designated as a floodplain administrator, and probably the best way to find out who it is in a particular community, if you can't find them, is to ask the state coordinator, who you can find through that stuff at the top. There are 22,000 communities, a little over that, participating in the program. And just to define what a community is, it is an area subject to development regulation by an entity. So it's not a neighborhood and it's not a group of people that have a common interest. A community in the NFIP is pretty much a jurisdiction. They don't have to have a building code per se, but they do have to be able to enforce a building requirement and to protect the floodplain according to an ordinance which they must adopt if they're going to be in the program. These are the major players in the program. If you're interested in where this program really, where it serves, there are, as you can see, all states and territories, just under 5.5 million flood insurance policies in the country, and as a national program, I guess that's not huge. The 9 states that you see here listed account for 78% of all those policies, and 1/3 of them are in Florida alone. If you look at this list, you can see why it's generally viewed as a coastal program, but wherever it is important. And it's inland and in all the states and territories. This link, the BSA NFIP stat.fema.gov, you can get the data by on policies, coverage, and premium for each individual community. Those 22,000 communities are individually listed. You can find yours and see how big a problem this is. I will say that the program impacts a lot more people than just the ones who have flood insurance policies. Sorry. Another resource is the community status book, and you have these links in your resource document. This is more not about the numbers of policies, but this is about their maps. When did they get the first flood insurance rate map? The date they entered the program. You can enter on an emergency basis or then on a regular basis where you have full insurance and a flood insurance rate map. The date of the current effective firm, because you're always rating insurance based on the current effective firm, and these maps change over time, so you need to know you're using the most current version. And then the status of participation for each community. You know, are they in the program? Are they suspended? Or on probation, or things like that. So you can find that through the community status book. And the second link down here is probably the easiest one, that if you just change that NC, which is for North Carolina, to your state abbreviation, you can get the status list for the communities in your state. Then that status book lists each community individually, but then gives you some summary statistics about how many communities there are in the state participating, how many are suspended. And you have those links. The other thing that might be a factor in whether you decide to get into this is the extent of the flood hazard in your area. As I said before, there's a lot more people impacted by this map than have flood insurance. So this is your basic flood map, paper version, gray shaded areas. This may look blue. Some people call this blue, but whatever it is, what matters is whether it's dark or light or white, not whether it's blue or gray. Now, just to show you extent of the flood hazard, this, for instance, is the parish of East Baton Rouge, which is where our university is down here in Baton Rouge. And most people don't realize that 40% of Baton Rouge is in the special flood hazard area. This is a more northern parish, Lincoln Parish, up by the northern border of Louisiana. Flooding is not such a big issue there. But then you go down to Vermilion Parish on our coast, and there is almost no area that is not special flood hazard area. There is a little up here in the, this area up here is still in the parish, and there's some apparently high ground. So, you know, it's a big deal in a parish like this. So, I mentioned the shades of gray for this, this map. And now, if you've printed it out, it would be handy because we're going to stare at this map for a while. The firm, the Flood Insurance Rate Map, FEMA develops the map. There is a long process that might take from 2 to 10 years to get a map developed and through the system of adoption. Communities are becoming more involved. In the early days, FEMA sent contractors in and they did their thing and they produced a map and gave it to the community, and then they talked about it a while and adopted it. But now more and more now, the communities are beginning to get more involved in the early stages of making these maps, providing local ground data and, you know, where does it flood and where does it not flood. So the maps really are a lot better when the communities get involved. So what does it say? If you look first at the shading and zones, the gray or blue, whatever you call it, the dark, the light, those are designated areas of flood risk that are portrayed. You have the important ones. The A's and the V's are the special flood hazard area. And this is what most people call being in the flood zone. You're in either an A zone or a V zone, and there are variations on A's and V's, but if it starts with an A or a V, it is in the special flood hazard area. And everything where there's a rule about in or out of the flood zone, this is the area they're talking about, this dark gray area. And again, those definitions are on the reference sheet that I provided. Basically, what the flood insurance rate map is a probability map. It's hydrology. They do some science and they figure out where is it that the land could be covered with a 1% chance in any year of that happening from any source. It could be rain, it could be backing up, it could be surge. They take the events where you have a probability of water rising on the ground, and when you get to the level that it's a 1% chance in any year that could happen, that's what they call the 100-year flood. So this is a probability map. It's not history, but history would have been used to see if it's reasonable. And, you know, they take information about rainfall and surges and that. That's why after a large event, there's always a map revision because they have new information. But they're not mapping the flood. They're adding that data into the hydrology, new ground data, new discharge data from streams. Maybe it doesn't carry as much as it used to, so now they have to figure on more overflow. But it's a lot of hydrological study that goes into making a map. There is one other, I wanted to tell you about the shaded X here. That's actually the 500-year or the 0.2% annual chance flood zone. Has no significance in most cases except for critical facilities. Sometimes need to avoid that zone. Critical facility like a hospital, a police station, and such as that. I keep clicking in the wrong spot, sorry. Okay, and then X, the white area, the truly white area, zone X, not shaded X, is what we call not in the flood zone, but it is flood zone X, and it's a minimal risk area. No problem being in an X zone. Nobody even wants to talk to you if you're in X zone in most cases, because there's no rules for X zones and no insurance requirement. So, one thing that's not on here that I want to cover is the levee protected areas. Many of us have levees protecting our communities. So what happens to this map if, for instance, somebody comes along here and builds this levee, this red line has a levee built there, and if that is judged to prevent that little river from getting into the adjacent area, then what happens is that becomes zone X. Well, it's white. It's not going to be flooded by the 100-year flood on that river. So it's taken out of the 100-year flood zone, and it has a special label now. I don't think this was on the older maps, but it is X protected by levee. So the newer maps, at least, when you're in this zone that you would be in the flood hazard area if it weren't for the existence of a levee, then it will be labeled that way, and you can tell from the label on the map what you're looking at. I'm going to talk a little bit later about why this levee protection is causing some problems for the program now. And if I forget, y'all can ask me, remind me to do that. Okay. The other bit of information on the flood map is the base flood elevations, the numbers that you see out here along the right edge, or the east edge, I guess, of the flood hazard area for the central portion of the flood zone. Let me go ahead and highlight some of those. For instance, right there, I've just turned on the little boxes, and they're drawn around squiggly lines. There's a squiggly line transecting the flood zone, and out to the right there's a number. Usually the number is right on the line, and it's kind of hard to see. But what that says is that the base flood elevation, starting at the top, is 10, and coming down is 9, and coming down to the middle of the flood zone there, it's 8. So, base flood elevation is the water surface elevation of the 100-year flood. The 100-year flood is the base flood. So the base flood elevation is the elevation of the water surface when that flood occurs at that location. It's the water surface elevation, and it includes the waves, if there would be any. Tells you nothing about the ground. There's another set of base flood elevations on here, down there in the lower right corner. They're built into the zone designations. So that's Zone A, E, EL8, and Zone VE, EL9. Those are static flood zones. So anywhere in the zone, the base flood elevation is going to be 8 for that AE. And for the VE zone, anywhere in the zone until you get a zone break line is going to be elevation 9. Again, that's water surface elevation, including waves. And those are the little icons that tell you the difference between A's and V's. V's will have breaking waves that are 3 feet high. The wave is 3 feet high or greater. If it's got a wave and it's a breaking wave and it's less than 3 feet high, it's an A zone. The reason they have that distinction is that the breaking waves are far more destructive than still water or water without waves, just water. So the insurance costs more, the building requirements are a little bit more stringent, and just based on the destructiveness of that water. So usually you see the V zones along the ocean coast, the Gulf Coast, the Great Lakes, But anywhere where you can have a sufficient depth of water and a long enough reach for the wind to be blowing to create these breaking waves, you'll have the V zones, and the rules are different for those zones. One other way that I've tried to explain what's going on with the flood map, and I really would like to know whether you think this is useful or not, on a slide. What you're looking at there's a red dotted line that's sort of a transect through the map. And what you have at the bottom, the green, is kind of the landscape looking sideways at the landscape that would go along with a map that looked like that. So here comes the 100-year flood, and you can see now I'm going to add in the coloring that goes along with that. And I'm going to get my little arrow here. In this area, you're underwater. That's flood zone because that's a 100-year flood and the ground is covered. And you're actually kind of right in here. I'm going to advance the slide. You see, and if this little man, Street View man, started walking inland, and he would rise up, and on the map, he's here. And so the coloring in this area of the land that is above the 100-year flood level is white. That's not in the 100-year flood zone. Would not be covered by water in the 100-year flood. And so I'm going to send him on his way a little bit further, and by the time he gets up there, he's back down here walking in water. And so he's in the land that would be covered by water in the 100-year flood, and that is the dark gray. Now, coming out on this side, there is an area, we don't actually have the elevation of the 500-year flood, but he'd be going through a gray area here. I can't move him, but he'd be going through that gray area right there when he keeps walking. That's 500-year flood, and then he'd be out here again, and he'd be fine. So, I've had this diagram for about 10 years, and I don't know that I've ever used it, but there it is. And that's all the ways that I have to kind of explain that, almost all the ways of explaining what is the 100-year flood and what does it mean? How do you interpret that map, and what does it mean on the ground? Last one is something we've developed for our outreach, which is the BFE scenarios. And it's a utility. The web address is here, and it's not really tied to anything, so anybody could use it. But it lets you put in the base flood elevation and the ground elevation, and then pick a house style or a foundation style for a building. And when you do that, it draws you a picture. So if you're on a slab and the BFE is 8 and the ground elevation is 7, you're not too bad of water. I mean, you got a little bit of water in your building, but, and you see the flood map doesn't tell us how deep the water is. It only tells us water surface elevation. So you got to go somewhere and get the ground elevation somewhere else. If that same base flood elevation is 8 and the ground is only at 1.5, even if you've got a 2-foot crawl space, you still got a lot of water in your house in that 100-year flood event. I am seeing a question over here from Bev that I'm going to go ahead and answer. When designated X protected, protected by the levy, can they drop flood insurance? And the answer is yes, but let me just qualify that. If they're in X protected by levy, there is not a federal requirement for the lender to require flood insurance. But the lender, since it's his money, can require flood insurance if it wants to. So there's a difference. There are a lot of places where, in the special flood hazard areas for sure, the institution has to require flood insurance if the property is in the special flood hazard area. If the property securing a mortgage is in the special flood hazard area. If it's not in the special flood hazard area, then it's kind of the lender's option to require it. There's no federal requirement. Did that answer your question, Beverly? You can just type, I think. Okay, so going back here, I think, and I forgot to turn my pages. Okay, I know what I wanted to do. I wanted to stop and see if there were any more questions about just reading the map. Anything before I go on? Okay, so we got A's and V's, we got X's, we got gray and light gray, and we know what they mean. I will tell you, I'm showing the A and V icons on the right side of the screen. There is, some new maps have a thing called coastal A zones, and they have waves as high as 1.5 feet. They're coastal A zones. So in the minimum requirements, they don't have anything different to do than a regular A zone. But if you're following the building code on the next edition, they're going to have to use V zone requirements, even if they're coastal A zones. Because what they found out is that 1.5 foot breaking wave is pretty dangerous too, and does a lot of damage. So the difference between V zone construction and A zone construction pretty much is, in an A zone, you can tolerate a certain amount of water getting on the foundation, some pressure on the structure, and just have to clean it up, you know, if you get it wrong when you're building and you're a little too low. In a V zone, if you start getting those breaking waves actually hitting the structural elements, it can do a lot of damage. So what they're trying to do is get the building above the base flood elevate entirely, the important part of it, and with a margin for error by building higher and with an open foundation in a V zone. I'll look at that again in just a minute. So no more questions coming there. So I'm going to go ahead and go on. I'm going to talk about some of the stuff that we think of as negative about what happens to you when this map comes along and you're in the flood hazard area. But I do want to point out that this is a service because it is letting people know where to expect a flood hazard. And without the flood insurance program, we wouldn't really have this tool. So I want to go ahead and say that about it before we get too far on. But and we've talked about some insurance and building requirements. So here comes the map, and you've got buildings that are in here. You got buildings that are in the dark gray. You got buildings in the light gray, buildings in white. If the regulations that apply to buildings in these areas are the same, they're even the same for new construction and old existing buildings. It's just that you need a trigger for the existing buildings. They're okay until something happens. New construction, you're trying to build to avoid the risk. And the other thing that matters here is, in terms of your insurance, is whether you were there before there was ever a map, or whether you were there because you built according to an existing map and now the map has changed. And those have names like pre-firm and grandfathered and special considerations for flood insurance. But if they're new construction or what's considered new construction because it is substantially improved or damaged and being repaired, then it meets the rules for new construction. It's for all buildings. These guys probably get hit the hardest. But this is an example. Okay, the pre-firm is the houses that, or the buildings that were there before the first flood insurance rate map for that community, and there are about 1 million of them. still. Of the 5.5 million policies, there are about 1 million that are still rated as they were there before there was the first flood map for that community. About 840,000 of them are somebody's primary residence. 220,000 are second homes and small businesses. And those 220,000, together with a couple other ones on that slide that have an asterisk, are in a category now that are going to be seeing their premiums go up 25% a year till they reach the premium it ought to be for being too low in the flood zone. The data for this, I've got the link down there. There's a file on the Association of State Floodplain Managers website that has this by community, all the different types of policies. You can see, you know, who's getting hurt in your communities if you go there. Development-wise, this is what the community is required to do. They have to issue a permit for any development, not just buildings, but also stockpiling and erecting levees and berms. Anything in the flood hazard area is supposed to have a permit. For buildings, including the home, office, barn, grain bins, whatever, the lowest floor has to be at or above the BFE. The building has to be anchored to resist flotation, and you have to use flood-resistant materials below the BFE. If you're building, developing not the houses, but making subdivisions, there's a requirement that the base flood elevations be put on the subdivision plats and on mobile home park developments. And the sewer systems have to be designed to prevent floodwater intrusion. So there's a whole lot to be done when the community participates in the flood insurance program. And one of the goals of the flood insurance program really was to guide development away from flood hazard areas. But what they really did was write a book on how do you build in the flood zone. I mentioned these different requirements, and again, this is a requirement, the responsibility of the community government to do this. The penalties and consequences, for example, if they don't enforce these rules, they can get sort of dinged, you know, on a visit, and then they get put on probation, and then they get suspended from the program, and nobody can buy flood insurance because they're not a participating community. And then the lenders who are requiring flood insurance for their mortgages have to foreclose on the mortgages because there's no flood insurance. That hasn't ever been tested on a large scale, but that's the rule. So that's the problem for the community and all the residents. If a person gets a permit from the jurisdiction to build a house that is, or a business, or a grain bin that is below base flood elevation, they're going to find out about it when they get insurance, and the premiums will be just outrageous. And it's a violation, and the building would have to be raised after the fact or torn down. And then the person who got that permit comes back to the government and sues the government for giving them a permit that caused them all this pain, and people actually win those lawsuits. So it's really important if you're working with governments to make sure that they understand this program and enforce. Quickly, I want to tell you that there are some alternatives to elevation for non-residential buildings. You can dry flood-proof them. That means you seal them in some way to keep water out. It's totally compliant. It just, equal to elevation for a non-residential building, not for a home, not for somebody's residence. That is allowed, and it has to be certified, just like elevation. There's a brand new book about that from last year. There's a link to it in your list. For ag buildings, there's a thing called wet floodproofing. They allow the community to give a variance for the grain bin or the machinery shed or whatever, and wet floodproof it, which means we're going to use flood-resistant materials and put everything that's really important up high in the building so the bottom part can flood, and let the water in but reduce the damage. And the problem with that is that it is insured based on its elevation. So you can put this wet floodproofing in, and then if you have to insure the building, it's still going to be rated as below BFE. There is a technical bulletin for that. And somewhere on your reference sheet, there's a link to the list of technical bulletins for this program, and that one is on at TB7. Again, I want to caution you about this because wet flood proofing doesn't get the community in trouble, but it's not recognized for premium reduction. And if you are going to use the property to secure a loan, you may have to get flood insurance on the building, and you would be paying really outrageous rates if you just wet flood proof the building. But it is an option. So, moving on, the new construction requirements, I mentioned this a little bit. You know, we're used to building, at least down here, on slabs, and some of you guys up north probably build with basements. And there are some states that have approved basement floodproofing programs, but just watch for the red circles here. See this guy, no problem. He gets to he's in the zone X, so he's not subject to the building requirements of the minimum ordinance. This guy in the gray, the light gray, is not subject to the 500-year. Another guy in the gray up in the northern part there, not subject. But anybody who's going to build in the special flood hazard area, the dark gray, is going to have to be elevated so that their lowest floor is above, and there's many ways to define lowest floor, but the lowest floor is above the base flood elevation. If you're in one of these A zones, you can pretty much do it on fill if you want to. Anything you want to do to get that floor up, FEMA doesn't really care. But in that lower right corner, if you're going to build in the VE zone, you need to be on an open foundation. You can't be building on supported on fill, and you can't obstruct the flow of water. And if you put a little wall down there, it's got to be a breakaway wall. And again, this is all about getting you above those waves, those very destructive waves. If you get rated based on your elevation, remember we looked at the guy that's only a foot too low, that's not too bad. That's only about $1,500 a year for a modest coverage. But if you're this guy, that's $10,000 a year. And the relevant depth here is the difference between the base flood elevation and the lowest floor, wherever that's measured. This is measured like an A zone because it's the top of the floor. V zone, you'd be measuring down, sorry, I'm pointing with my cursor and it's not saying anything. Okay. This is where you measure for A zone, and down here is where you measure for V zone. So let's just go with the 4-foot difference. And the rule of thumb that FEMA is using is it's $10,000 for every $10,000 a year premium for every 4 feet you are too low, if you're below base flood. So you don't want to get caught being really low, and you don't. and I'll show you in a little bit how that is happening to some communities and what it's doing to the mapping. So what happens to these guys, assuming that they are below BFE? I have a little animation for that. Let's say they have this nice house that was there. It was, doesn't matter whether it was there before the first map or if this area got mapped, it was an X and now it's a special flood hazard area. They'll get special treatment on their insurance premiums either way. Don't have to do anything. Let's say that's 2 feet below base flood elevation. And let's say that they want to do an interior renovation to that house. No addition to the house, just an interior renovation, or add a second story even, or a third, fill it out. Anything where the cost of the improvement is going to be more than half of the value of the building. Not the value of the lot, but the value of the building. And in this case, I gave that building a value of $120,000. So if they go in and they want to do a major remodel on that within the same footprint, and it's going to cost more than $60,000, they're going to have to elevate the building before they can do the renovation. That's called substantial improvement in the footprint. Now let's say they want to do a lateral addition. See, they want to add a wing on the back there. That is also a substantial improvement if it costs more than $60,000 for this basic house. And then this, they either have to elevate the addition if they're in an A zone, or elevate the entire house and then add the addition if they're in a V zone. And here's the killer, is the substantial damage. They have a fire, for instance, and the cost to restore that fire damage is going to be more than $60,000. They have to elevate the building before they can repair the house. And this is what I think most people don't realize. It doesn't matter why the damage was so extensive or what caused the damage. What matters is that you are investing more than half the value of the structure back into the building, and your local government is not supposed to give you a permit to repair the damage unless you elevate the structure. Your homeowners generally will not cover that. There is a codes and ordinances kind of rider on homeowners that will cover meeting codes and ordinances. I don't know how much of it covers. The only insurance that would cover the cost of actually elevating the building before you repair it is flood insurance. That's only $30,000, and it's only if flood caused the damage. So, this is what we have. The messages for the consumers are: protect yourself from future flood damage, get flood insurance. It's not part of homeowners. Make sure you have contents coverage, also not part of homeowners. And recognize the risk if you're build above BFE. Get involved when they say they're making a map and make sure it's right, and know that the maps are old news when you get them, because flood levels rise. I have droned on a little bit too long. If you would have some ideas on how you can put these messages into your extension programs, it'd be great to have them incorporated in the chat. For the communities, is don't ignore this program. You're going to get maps. They're better if you participate, and if you adopt early, you can avoid a lot of grief for your property owners, and adopt and enforce that ordinance. So everybody will be happy. And again, if there's any program that you have that you can put this information into your program, it would be good. And I'd like to see it in the chat box. I think I'll stop there unless I get questions on the reauthorization. I'm going to flash these last few slides at you real quick. The program is in trouble. Everybody knows it. It's broke, and it doesn't have a solvency plan. And every attempt to make it more solvent means higher insurance premiums, especially when the map changes. And I'll go ahead and click these in. I do have it. We'll have it in the PowerPoint for you later. But basically what this means is that the small businesses and agricultural communities where they have to insure the property on the land that's actually the collateral are going to get hit with some really serious flood insurance headaches, increased premiums and surcharges now. The problem with levies is that when you're behind one, the BFE looks like almost nothing, and when the levy goes away because it wasn't certified, nobody would document it. It's, you know, people are finding themselves 6 to 20 feet below BFE when those levies are no longer certified. So FEMA's been told not to do that analysis and to replace it with a better one that gives some credit for a levy. And with that, let me slip on through to my end slide. I'm sorry, Ken, I didn't leave you a lot of time for anything or for questions, which I'm really kind of sad about, but I will be here as long as the room allows us to be here to answer any questions. So thank you all for your attention.
Okay, well, maybe we'll hold questions for just a little bit, and I'll go through the last few slides. It's just pointing out a few of the resources that are available. We have, of course, the Extension Disaster Education Network, and that has a lot of resources primarily developed for the extension agents and others to utilize, but it's also a good resource for the general public as well. And so if you're looking for flood information as part of an educational program, this would be one of the best places to start. Another area, and the URL isn't showing up very clear, is our extension.org website, where we have, again, a number of resources that are available. And this is a national effort, both the Eden site as well as the extension site, a national effort to compile resources that are being developed by the various institutions. There's the FEMA website that has a number of good resources available on it. We have gone into a number of ways to try to help make sure people are aware of the resources that are being put both on eExtension and the Eden site. We're getting into Facebook, and so this is the Facebook page. This one is tweeting. I'm not one that is big into tweeting, but we have different ones that are trying to get some of that information tweeted out to those that keep current through tweets and referring them back to the information as it comes up. This one, I believe, is the one that is on Google. We're using Google, we're using Facebook, we're trying to use all the various different types of social media to get people back to our two main sites, being the Eden site and the extension.org site. This is Pinterest. Again, there's a lot of people that use Pinterest, and this is the what I kind of call the home page for our Extension Disaster Education Network. And a lot of these, our focus today is on flooding, but includes educational resources on a variety of disaster-related topics. This one, I think, is the Google one. And that brings us then to the end. And Jerry Hammond is one that has been doing a lot to try to move us into this social media area. And she's been putting up the URLs in the chat box that weren't showing up. So we'll take a minute or two either to ask questions of Pat or myself. Feel free to type them into the chat box, and we'll try to respond to those. Are there any questions?
I saw David C. was typing, but it seems to have stopped.
We'll wait just a minute.
Sarah is typing from Minnesota, where it has been flooding.
Yeah, and one of the things I'll just comment on is not only are these resources available, but several states, Minnesota, North Dakota, Louisiana, have websites as well. And so those are good resources to look to as well. Sarah's question is, how have others used this information with residents, and is there a lesson prepared? That's part of what we're trying to do. There are a number of materials on the Eden website, and Pat, I'll maybe let you take the lead on answering.
Okay, I did include links to the NFIP page on Eden in the resource list, even though I didn't mention it. Information about the program and about the flood premiums rising, and I need to update the latest and greatest on the legislation. Sarah, let me go to your first question. How have others used this info? The best example that I have is our housing specialist, Claudette Reichel, had a first-time home buyer education program 20 years ago when I came to Extension, and of course it included something about homeowners insurance. So we were able then to add to that lesson something about flood insurance so that people knew to have flood insurance. That was the first, I guess, use of the flood insurance information in an existing program. I wish I had left more time for people to talk about how they may have done it. But I think this is a program that could be very meaningful for people who are doing work with local governments that may not realize the significance of this mapping business. When FEMA comes in and says, we're going to map your community, and they say, all right, go ahead. We'll argue about it when you give it to us. But you really need to get in there and understand what it means. And the other thing we need to be watching is what's happening with the program, because we really do need the program to protect people, for insurance for people who do flood. And we do need it to be affordable. And, Congress went several years with a one-year authorization and one-year authorization. We thought it was like heaven when they said 5-year authorization in 2012. But then we read all the fine print, which was, oh gosh, we can't have this. And then in 2014, they undid a lot of what they had done in 2012. But it just showed that they really didn't understand how the program works. So there's so many levels to be able to get involved in this, from just telling people, if you see that there's FEMA's coming in to map the community, don't ignore that. Get involved and get people to participate in it. As far as a lesson, I couldn't share a lesson. I don't know if anybody's on that would have a lesson to share, but certainly do that through the chat box.
Well, I guess I'll jump in here. That's part of what we have a NIFA project underway, where we're compiling resources that will be on both the Eden site and e-extension to complement what's already there. And there's probably not an overwhelming supply of actually prepared lessons, but there's a lot of resource material that's available depending on how you want to use it. Off the e-extension website, there's a lot of information on, preparing for floods, for the kinds of things that need to be done to mitigate a flooding event. There's information on the cleanup part of it, and a lot of those link back to things that are being done in the various states. And so that's kind of a network that exists that hopefully provides the resources that can be used to actually conduct the educational programming. And then kind of as a final piece here, maybe I'll use this as an opportunity to kind of lead into our next webinar. The community of Fargo has experienced several flooding events. We've got a fair amount of experience at preparing for and fighting floods, mitigating those flooding events, and a lot of experience working with the flood maps, working cooperatively with FEMA as they prepare the flood maps. And the group that leads that effort here in Fargo is our city engineer's office. And the lead engineer has agreed to do a webinar for us, and that is what is going to be our next topic. Is that engineer will be sharing her experiences both from a flood fighting standpoint, but also the mapping perspective, and what Fargo's experience has been at trying to protect our community. So I encourage you to look forward to that. That will be announced in the fairly near future as soon as we firm up everything. She has agreed to do that, and we're just identifying the dates and information that Virginia